Hi friends, I'm Bill Vennard and welcome to this episode of Equip 412. In this episode we're going to explore the question, why believe Christianity? Christianity as a worldview. You know, there are so many differing worldviews, philosophies, and religious points of view out there today, or whatever you choose to call them. What distinguishes Christianity from the rest? What makes Christianity stand out, or does it? Does Christianity offer explanations regarding important questions about life, death, heaven, and hell? Where did we come from? How did we get here? Why are we here? Is there any purpose to my life? What is my purpose? What happens after death? Which worldview will help me to become a better person? And so on. And there are many other questions we could ask, but which worldview seems to be the one that provides the most reasonable, consistent answers? How can we evaluate those worldviews to find out? It's probably no surprise that I believe that Christianity provides the most consistent, coherent, and reasonable answers to those questions. I didn't come to that conclusion lightly. I was not raised in a Christian home. I was exposed to some of the claims of Christianity early in life. Easter, Christmas, occasional Sunday school, but rejected them by the time I was 13 and didn't give religion much thought again until I was almost 30. And at that time I became convinced that Jesus was the Christ, the Jewish Messiah, the resurrected Son of the living God. Following that decision, I can't say that my life was free from doubts regarding my newfound faith or that it was easy. But over the years since then, I've learned and come to firmly believe that there is no worldview that provides better or more reasonable answers to life's more perplexing questions than Christianity and the truths that it proclaims, at the center of which is the person of Jesus Christ. Does Christianity pass the test? In this episode, I'm going to begin the process of how to test the claims of any worldview. In the next episode, I'll delve into how Christianity provides the most reasonable and satisfying answers to some of those questions I just mentioned. Author James Anderson tells the story of a man named Donald. It seems he had just been told by his doctor that he had a very aggressive form of cancer that required immediate intensive treatment. But apparently Donald refused to believe it. He said, "Sorry, Doc, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I've never had a serious disease in my life. There's no history of cancer in my family. What's more, you need to understand that I have a wife, 3 children, and a thriving career. I simply can't afford to have cancer." No offense, but I'm going to get a second opinion. So Donald got a second opinion, a third, a fourth, and even a fifth opinion. But after every test, the results were the same: cancer. In spite of 5 different medical opinions, he repeated his refrain: "I can't believe it." And he wasn't kidding. He really did not believe it. Instead, he believed that all the tests must have been mistaken, and so he continued to live his life as though his body was entirely cancer-free. The reality was that Donald did have cancer, just as his doctor had originally told him. He refused to believe the diagnosis. Should he have believed it? If so, why? Before you answer that question, consider this one. Why should anyone believe anything? The most significant aspect of the spirit of the age today has to do with truth. While it's widely believed that although Christianity may be accepted as true by Christians, it can't be true for those who believe something else. And to impose our religious views on others would be viewed as intolerant, close-minded, arrogant, or even bigoted. Why should anyone ever believe anything? You may recall that Pontius Pilate famously said, "What is truth?" Professor Alan Bloom, who wrote The Closing of the American Mind, said, "There is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes or says he believes that truth is relative. He wrote that more than 30 years ago. Today, a majority of people believe that truth, and that truth varies from person to person or from culture to culture. What's true for one person or in one culture needn't be true for everyone or in all cultures. There's no such thing as truth in any absolute or universal sense of the word. There's no such thing as absolute truth. Is that true? Think about that statement. There's no such thing as absolute truth. Is that statement meant to be taken as true? Is it absolutely true? Do you see a problem with that? People who make that claim must think it's true. But if all truth is relative, then that has to include the truth that all truth is relative, doesn't it? But does that make sense? No, it's a self-defeating argument. So what is truth? According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, truth is the body of real things, events, and facts. Actuality, the state of being the case, a fact. Number two, the property as of a statement of being in accord with fact or reality. Notice real things, events, facts, the state of being the case. The property of being in accord with fact or reality. Isn't truth what we're ultimately aiming for when we believe certain things and disbelieve other things? We all recognize that our beliefs should be true beliefs rather than false beliefs, don't we? After all, no one wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to believe that pigs are born to fly, even though it's not true. I don't care. That's the truth I choose to believe. Whether or not our opinions bring us a sense of peace, well-being, comfort, excitement, or anything else, none of that is relevant if those opinions are not based on truth. Beliefs should be based on truth. Can we at least agree that our beliefs, our worldview, should be based on truth, on facts and evidence, not just personal opinions, feelings, or public majority polling? Donald should have believed his doctor's medical opinion because it was true, and that truth was supported by facts, information, evidence. When someone asks, why should I believe that's true? They're looking for reasons confirmed by evidence. In Donald's case, he chose to not believe the evidence. Sadly, that's also often true when people don't believe in God, Jesus, or reject the claims of Christianity. Either they deny the evidence, or they've never heard the evidence, or never heard it explained to them, and maybe just are relying on what they have heard from second or third-hand sources. It may even be that the people they heard it from also probably heard it from second or third-hand sources too. There are basically two views of truth. First, it's subjective, or it's personal, it's individual, which means it's biased. It has to do with what's in my mind, what I believe, my idea of truth, or what the culture accepts as true. In other words, truth is something we create. So, if truth is subjective, if it's what I believe, then it's going to change over time. There will be no sense of cohesiveness or continuity or reliability if what we define as truth is always shifting. What's true today may not be true tomorrow. So who or what's right? Or who or what's wrong? Another version of truth is it's objective, unbiased. Truth is something we discover, not something we invent. The truth exists outside of us and is not affected by our force of will or our subjective feelings. If something is true, it is true for everyone, regardless of personal opinion or cultural approval. Everyone may not accept the truth, but that doesn't make it any less true. Truth is not something I make up. It's not my opinion. If truth is not based on objective events and facts, then it's only my opinion. Remember Donald? He decided that he didn't have cancer, even though all the facts said that he did. Our beliefs are often based on limited facts, like there's no history of cancer in my family. And Donald may have very strongly believed and had emotions based on that limited fact. But once all the evidence was presented to him, Donald was not justified in clinging to those beliefs. Christianity is based on the truth that we believe God has revealed himself to us, but that's not all. Does the evidence support that? Well, that's how every worldview should be examined. So, what exactly is a worldview? Well, let me say at the beginning that everybody has one. Yep. Everyone has a worldview. Basically, it's a philosophical view of the world, and not just of our planet, but of the entire universe, indeed, all of reality. It's all-encompassing perspective. It's an all-encompassing perspective on ourselves and everything else that exists, especially those things that matter most to us and have the greatest influence on our lives. Our worldviews represents our most fundamental beliefs and assumptions about the universe we inhabit. In sum, our worldviews reflect how we should answer all the big questions of human existence, the fundamental questions we ask about life and the universe. It's a quote from Why Should I Believe Christianity by James Anderson. So, what are those big questions? Well, I brought up some of them at the beginning. Questions like, is there a God? What is God like? Can anyone know the truth? Where did the universe come from? Does life have a purpose? How are we to live? Is there life after death? What happens when we die? Do all humans have inherent worth and dignity? How do we know? Where do we find out those things? Here's a chart that compares some differing worldviews. On the left, you see the different worldviews, and on the top, across the top, you see some of the questions. And then you can see down through there how those worldviews compare. Just a quick glance at this chart shows us that all worldviews are not the same. They are not just individual parts of the elephant, so to speak, or small pieces of a bigger puzzle. They are very distinct differences. There's differences between all of them. There's some similarities, but there's still major differences. As you look at that chart, it seems pretty clear that not all worldviews are the same. Let me just emphasize here, there are not many ways to God. Ask yourself this: why would God give one way to one group of people, another way to another group, and still another way to other people? Wouldn't that make God a very fickle God who's not very stable or reliable or is just playing games? In fact, wouldn't that make God ultimately a liar or a deceiver? Wouldn't that make him a being that could not be trusted? So why do worldviews matter anyway? Have you ever watched a house being built? When I was a young man, I worked construction during the summer months when I was in college. And I learned that the importance of a good, solid foundation, whether it's for a house or a large office building. The first parts of the house to be built are the foundations, and then the framework. These parts are absolutely essential. You can't lay a foundation and then not put up framework and then try to put up a roof without it. You won't get very far that way. These parts are essential. With a poor foundation, or no foundation at all, the house will collapse. Yikes. There's three reasons why worldviews matter. First, worldviews are necessary for our thinking about the world. Without some basic assumptions about what is real, what is possible, what is reasonable, and so on, our thinking would be without a basic structure and would not be stable to our thought lives. Second, worldviews matter because they greatly shape the way that we think about the world, ourselves, and our relationships with others. It's kind of like wearing a pair of glasses. We see and evaluate our experiences, our relationships, and so on through our specific worldview glasses. Our responses to experiences and circumstances, what opinions we form on matters of ethics, politics, morality, our ethic, work ethic, and so on, are all greatly influenced by our worldview. Worldviews play a central role in our lives. And third, worldviews matter because our worldview affects how we evaluate a truth claim and how we interpret evidence for or against that truth claim. One might ask, aren't there different worldviews? Well, yes, we've already seen that in that chart. But we can test our own worldview and the worldview of others. So how do we evaluate which one is true? Well, it starts on the basis of evidence. How we interpret evidence, which can take many different forms, will largely depend on our worldview. So there's kind of a complex two-way relationship between worldviews and evidence. That means we can't simply refute or disprove another person's worldview by just appealing to the evidence. Someone might ask, isn't it just a matter of personal choice? I see the world through my worldview, you see the world through your worldview, and there's no right or wrong about it, right? Well, while it's true that our culture, upbringing, and education do have a significant influence on our worldviews, we need to recognize a very important point. The fact that our worldviews are influenced by these factors do not mean that our worldviews are equally good. The reason for that takes us back to something I said before. We shouldn't want our beliefs, or we should want our beliefs to be true, because true beliefs are better than false beliefs. Our worldviews involve beliefs, assumptions, and value judgments, all of which can be true or false. So, worldview X can be more true than worldview Y, in the sense that X better represents reality. In that case, worldview X is better than worldview Y. Going back to the pictures of the two houses, I think we can safely say that one foundation was definitely better than the other, wouldn't you? So how do we evaluate worldviews? First, the consistency test. That is, any worldview that involves inconsistent beliefs or assumptions cannot be true, at least at those points where an alleged inconsistency seems to exist, because it's a basic rule of logic that no contradiction is true. For example, there are people who believe that there are no objective moral laws, laws that apply to everyone, while also believing there's a cosmic law of karma, according to which we're rewarded for our good deeds and punished for our bad ones. If not in this life, then certainly in the next. But those beliefs are inconsistent because if there's an objective law of karma, then there must also be some kind of objective, impartial moral law somewhere by which people's deeds can be judged as either good or bad. To the extent that a worldview appears to be self-contradictory, we have reason to think that it's not true. However, we do need to make sure we have properly understood a worldview on its own terms before we accuse it of being inconsistent. Second, the coherence test. This is a worldview. A worldview coheres if its parts hold together well and support one another. If it includes beliefs and assumptions that appear to be unrelated to each other or that are in tension with each other, then that worldview lacks coherence. On the other hand, if a worldview includes beliefs and assumptions that do cohere or hold together, where some parts explain other parts, then that worldview has coherence. Here's an example of coherence. Here we have Susan and Alex. Susan believes that the universe was created by a personal God, and also that there are objective moral laws which govern how human beings should live, laws that are outside of us or over us, laws which we do not invent. Alex, on the other hand, believes there may be objective moral laws, but he has an atheistic worldview according to which the human species is just a cosmic accident, a product of blind evolutionary processes with no ultimate design or purpose. On these 2 points, the existence of God and the nature of morality, Alex's worldview is less coherent than Susan's, because Susan believes that moral laws come from God. There is a law giver. Alex can't explain where moral laws come from. There's no lawgiver. Does that mean that Alex is not a moral person? No. He may lead a good moral life. It just means that he has no objective foundation on which to base his beliefs in moral laws. He cannot answer the question, where do moral laws come from? Or why are there moral laws at all? In fact, prominent atheist Dr. Richard Dawkins says, in a material universe, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. Atheism fails to provide an objective basis for saying any particular action is good or evil, whether it's feeding the poor or torturing the innocent. We would say one is good and one is evil, but without an objective basis to decide what is good or what is evil, then who decides which is which? Popular opinion, the culture, majority rule, a dictator? If there's no objective basis, then what's considered evil in one generation may come to be considered good, or at least acceptable, in another generation. Who or what decides? Or does God provide us with an objective standard? Third, there's the explanation test. A good worldview will help us explain the things we observe about ourselves and the world we inhabit. If a worldview can explain things and explain them well, it's a good indication that the worldview is true. Or, if one worldview can better explain things than another worldview, we have more reason to believe the first than the second. Let me illustrate. We frequently take for granted that among all living creatures there is something special about humans. We tend to treat each other with a moral respect and dignity that we don't extend to, say, snakes and weasels. According to some worldviews, such as Christianity and Judaism, human beings are special because we're created by God in His own image. In other words, we reflect the characteristics of God in a very limited but unique way. So these worldviews offer a foundational explanation for why we ascribe special dignity to humans. Those who believe humans are the product of blind evolutionary processes, along with every other organism on the planet, find it hard to give a good explanation for why human beings should be treated as more morally valuable than any other species. If we are just here by chance, just like every other organism, then we have no more moral value than a blade of grass, a flower, a tree, or a cockroach or termite. The fourth test is the evidence test. The basic idea here is that if a worldview is true, then it should fit with the evidence we have available to us. The immediate evidence of our senses, the evidence of reason, the evidence of conscience, the evidence of history, the evidence of science, and so on. What does that mean? Evidence is anything that can serve as a truth indicator, anything that points towards the truthfulness of some belief or claim. Anderson says the following about the evidence test. The evidence test is important because a person's worldview can be confirmed or disconfirmed by the evidence. No one interprets evidence in isolation from their worldview. Since our worldviews include our ultimate presuppositions about what's real, what's reasonable, what's possible, and so on, our worldviews influence how we interpret any evidence that is presented to us. So, we can't just point to the evidence or the facts to prove or disprove a worldview. I alluded to this back in episode 1. It's almost impossible to set aside our worldviews or presuppositions when examining the evidence of anything, because they're part of us. So what are we to do? Well, Anderson suggests that we try to consider what we'd expect if a particular worldview were true. In other words, what would be surprising or unsurprising if that worldview were actually true? For example, the Christian worldview claims that the Bible is divinely inspired. That means that God guided the human authors, He breathed into them, inspired them to write what He wanted them to write. Now, if that claim is true, then we would expect the Bible to have some very special features, such as being consistent in its teaching, showing great insight into human nature and human problems, providing wisdom and counsel that transforms people's lives, and reveals things to us that only God can know, such as prophecy, predictions about the future. If the Bible does indeed have those features, that's evidence for the Christian worldview. And if it doesn't, that's evidence against the Christian worldview. You and I can't properly evaluate something if we don't adequately understand the thing we're evaluating. Now, unfortunately, way too many people are way too eager to register their opinions about things they know very little about. When evaluating worldviews, it's important to remember that each worldview should be evaluated on its own terms, not by the standards and expectations of some other worldview. Suppose we're comparing two worldviews, worldview X and worldview Y. If worldview X is allowed to sit on the judge's bench when worldview Y is on trial, it will hardly be surprising to find that worldview Y is found guilty simply because it is not worldview X. You see? People who criticize Christianity often do so without realizing that their objections actually take for granted some other worldview than the Christian one. This is specifically common, or especially common, when it comes to moral objections to Christianity. In effect, the critics are judging Christianity on the basis of non-Christian standards and expectations. But that's stacking the deck ahead of time. Christianity needs to be evaluated on its own terms, just like any other worldview, using the 4 tests that we have just covered. If Christianity fails to live up to its own standards, then so be it. But no one should reject Christianity simply because it isn't something other than Christianity. Christianity should be rejected, or shouldn't be rejected, by a Muslim just because it's not Islam. It shouldn't be rejected by an atheist because it's not naturalistic or materialistic, or because the atheist doesn't believe miracles can happen, or that the Bible is nothing but fairy tales. In order to be fair, the atheist must evaluate Christianity on its own merits by using those 4 tests. Next time, I'll evaluate Christianity using the 4 tests. Now, I won't be able to examine everything about Christianity, but we'll do some key tests on some aspects of Christianity to see if, in fact, Christianity does pass the test. I hope you'll join me next time. Thank you for watching this episode of Equip 412. I hope you'll join me next time as we continue with Why Believe Christianity, Part 2, Does Christianity Pass the Test? Please check out our website at equip412.com or drop me an email at billv@equip412.com. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, remember this: but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. May the Lord bless you abundantly, friends. See you soon.